Welcome to Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michelle Kawamoto Perry. In every episode, we explore how people from educators and artists to executives and entrepreneurs lead with authenticity, rise through adversity, and share the wisdom they've gained along the way. Today's guest is a force of nature and a fierce advocate for heart-led change. Dr. Melissa Bird is a descendant of the Shivwitts Band of Paiutes, a lay preacher, healer, and podcaster whose work bridges social justice, soulful leadership, and deep community connection. With decades of experience as an activist, educator, and grief facilitator, Dr. Bird reminds us that real leadership doesn't come from having all the answers, but from asking better questions, honoring our intuition, and listening with open hands and hearts. From navigating profound personal loss to leading policy change at the state level, she invites us into a more compassionate, communal, and revolutionary way of being. Welcome to Expressions of Leadership, Dr. Bird. It's a true pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Also, when I listen to you read my bio, I think, wow, she is so cool.
That's exactly right.
It's nice to be the kind of person that I'd like to get to know.
Well, your story begins with such a deeply personal and transformative moment, the loss of your father at a young age. How did that shape your view of leadership and your journey into healing work?
Ooh. So, my dad committed suicide when I was 6, and that was back in 1980 when we didn't actually talk about these things. And and so I learned very early on what it looked like to be upended into chaos. My mother was devastated and heartbroken, but I didn't see what was happening to us in our childhood in that way until I was much older. Like I would say, like 45. Like I remember having a conversation with my mom as an adult saying, that must have been really horrible for you. Like it must have been really horrible for your heart to be broken and then having to take care of these two little kids who we were 3 and 6 at the time. And and there is something so powerful and poetic about being able to now, in my middle age, I'm turning 51 this year, look back at my life and think about how transformational that childhood, like there are so many things I call upon in my adulthood that I learned in my childhood. And some of them could have been turned out to be really toxic, fierce independence. I'm fiercely independent, right? I know how to take care of myself. I learned how to do that at a very young age. Um, like there, I learned how to speak up for myself. I also learned how to be silenced, and so there were so many things that happened throughout my childhood as I was growing up, where there was just a lot of chaos in my life and in my home, and I remember very distinctly wanting to speak up for people who didn't have a voice. I didn't have a voice. And I wanted so badly to be able to advocate for other people, but I didn't know that the word was advocacy. I had no idea that that was the word. And so I remember like doing like these protests in high school. I grew up in a very small town in rural Utah. Um, that was a big tourist town. So it would get really big and then it would get really small, depending on if ski season was happening. And I remember doing these one woman protests outside the high school. Like I was like, we have to stand up for women. And, and sometimes my friends would join me and sometimes they wouldn't, but I remember just becoming very fiercely passionate about child abuse in particular because of um, my own upbringing and always wanting to help other people. And I actually ended up going to college and getting my degree in early childhood development and family studies because I wanted to help abused and neglected children. And that was how I really got my career started in social work. I taught preschool. Um, and, I really got my career in starting to advocate for children. And that was in my very early 20s. And then that evolved into me going into social work and advocating for LGBTQ issues and women's health and reproductive justice And that, I think it was, as I look back, I really truly believe it was that upbringing of having to fight for myself to be seen that's allowed me to advocate and help other people through leadership.
You often describe yourself as a soulful leader. What does that term mean to you?
Well, one of the things I learned, I throughout my advocacy career, my leadership career, I ended up becoming a lobbyist. I was a lobbyist uh, for Planned Parenthood of Utah for several years. I advocated for LGBTQ rights in Utah for several years. And it was in that process of lobbying and advocacy that I really started to figure out that this us versus them mentality, like you have these two political parties that are supposed to be completely at odds with each other. I did not approach my work that way. I approached it as this is an entire legislative body, whether it's at the state level or the congressional level, because I also did some work at the federal level, that that these are just people. They're literally people who put their pants on one leg at a time. In the state legislatures in particular, you've got farmers, you've got doctors, you've got stay-at-home moms, you've got like lawyers. Like the state legislative body is made up of people who really are just people. And the minute I realized that, I started connecting with elected officials at a human to human level. I, you know, yes, I would get embroiled in party politics. I wasn't perfect. I could do the us versus them, no problem. I was in my 20s when I had that job, so I was very feisty and fiery. But the one thing that carried me through was this personalized connection that I made with people. I was the queen of the handwritten thank you note. Like everyone who would meet with me would get a handwritten thank you note. And I would make personal connections with our elected officials. I remember one time talking to someone who had been on the board of the Boys and Girls Club, and I had used the Boys and Girls Club. And like making these personalized connections with people in power is soulful leadership. Like when we remember that we are here to connect on a human to human level and that we are all actually interconnected as people, that animosity and that very rigid either or thinking dissolves. And that's what I mean when I talk about soulful leadership. Like we have to remember that we are humans being on this planet. We are here to be connected to each other. I mean, the fact that you and I are having this conversation from connections, hundreds of thousands of miles, like hundreds, if not thousands of miles away, like that's crazy. Like when we start to remember that we are here in shared humanity and that we all have a purpose and we all have a mission, then we can start to see each other as people who have similarities instead of people who have all these differences.
I often say we are human beings, not human doings.
Yes, exactly. Yes. I think one of the most critical pieces is for us to stop dehumanizing each other. Um, I I actually gave a sermon about this, where I talked about asking homeless people their name instead of just looking at them and, maybe you give them a dollar or two or whatever, or you look down upon them because they're not engaging in appropriate behavior right ever. But if you're talking to somebody and a great example of this is we have a guy who holds up a sign that says he's an Army veteran, and my husband is an Army veteran. And so Jim and I talked to him, like Jim talks to him about where he served and what he did and who he is and how he got here. And he's always just mind blown that someone asks him his name and talks to him and introduces them to him as if he's a human being, right? And I think so often in especially as themes are getting more and more agitated and us versus them, and I think that's on purpose to tear us asunder and tear us further and further apart. We've got to remember that we are all connected. And I was actually working with a client this week who said that she was having a really hard time at work because her boss was really stressing her out. And I said, well, what do you think that's about? Like, why do you think your boss is becoming a little bit tyrannical? And she sat there for a minute and I said, "Is she worried about where your funding's going to come from? Because I know the part of the world that they work in, a lot of it gets funded by the federal government. Like, is she afraid that your funding's going to get cut? And what is she going to do to feed her family?" And my client had not thought about it that way. She just thought about how it was impacting her and her ability to do her job and lead in her job. And she said that was a game changer for her. Like, all of a sudden she can have compassion for her boss, even if her boss isn't being very nice. She can almost understand why, because of the pressure that her boss is under to make this project do what it needs to do. And I think if we start to look at people who are in our lives on a regular basis as deeply flawed, complicated, messy people just like us, then we can start to have that compassionate response for each other and see each other in that way.
Yes, tapping into empathy and compassion and reminding ourselves that we are all perfectly imperfect human beings.
Yeah, I think there's something really so powerful about remembering that so much of what gets us amped up, whether it's in the news or in social media or in our conversations that we're reading online, especially, I don't think this happens as much when we're talking person to person because something shifts when we're speaking to each other. But if we stopped getting so um triggered, like triggered's not the right word, like we get amplified because of this structure of immediate response, immediate response, immediate response that we've been trained to because of social media, because we're carrying around this computer in our hands and it demands an immediate response. And one of the things that I really, like I mentioned when I first started telling my story, we were not talking about people dying like my dad died in 1980. Absolutely under no circumstances were we having that conversation. Now we have the conversation all the time. We talk about mental health. We talk about suicidology. We talk about physical health. We talk about all of these things all of a sudden. And I'm raising children. I have 3 kids. What I keep telling them is this has not always been the conversation. This has not always been having open and honest conversations about reproductive justice, LGBTQ issues, mental health, physical health, spiritual health, all of these things that we think have young people in particular think we've always been able to have these conversations and we haven't. And some of that is good. And also, I think some of that leads to us thinking this is how it has to stay and this is how it always has to be. And what I love about thinking about it that way is that, you know, 45 years from now, something else will be different too, right? Like 45 years from now, my kids are going to look back at their kids and go, that's actually not how it used to be. Let me tell you about a pandemic, right? Like, I just think it's so fascinating how our language gets twisted and we think we've always spoken like this and we haven't.
Now, you also write powerfully about grief as this gateway to connection with transformation. How can leaders better acknowledge and work with grief in their communities and organizations?
Oh, I love that question so much. I'm so glad you asked it. I think one of the most profound things that leaders and organizations can remember, especially if they're managing teams, is that in 2020, we went through a global grief crisis. People were getting sick, and we never knew if we were going to get sick or not, which heightens our nervous system and makes us respond in a heightened way. So we were afraid of getting sick. We were afraid of dying. We were afraid of people telling us what to do, right? We were afraid of for the people that we love. And and so what happened is we had this heightened experience of grief, and we do not grieve well in this nation or in the world, really, but we really don't have good grief ritual. So there was this huge movement to go back to work. There was this huge movement to get the economy going again. And in the meantime, almost, I would say all of us were grieving some form of grief about the loss of the life that we thought we were going to have. Never again was it going to look the same. And the last time we truly did that as an entire planet was during World War II. And so here we are in this huge grief cycle, and we're trying to expect people to come back to work with long-term COVID, with grief unresolved because we couldn't go through the ritual of saying goodbye to our family members who may have died, especially in those early days. That was very traumatizing for people. And we're expecting them to hop back to it, get back on Teams, and work a 10-hour day. And you can't do that. We have to grieve, and grief is a lifelong process. So the other thing I think is really important for people to remember is grief is not over in a 3-day bereavement timeline. Grief lasts forever. I I miss my dad. I was 6 years old when he died. I still grieve my dad, especially when big things are happening in my life, marriages, you know, graduations, like the big things that occur, those big ritual moments. I wish my dad was here. And so, if we can start to honor the idea that most of us are probably dealing with unresolved grief, and if we were willing to just acknowledge it, we don't have to fix it. We don't have to give everybody, mental health services. We don't have to do that, although it would be nice, but we don't have to. Just in the acknowledging of the fact that people have had experiences of loss, that leads us to that compassion that I was talking about earlier. All of a sudden, we can be compassionate towards our employees, towards our bosses, towards our boards, towards the people that we're interacting with every single day. If we can just acknowledge, wow, they must be having a really hard time right now and not know how to deal with it. We don't have to solve the problem. But if we acknowledge that it exists, and all of a sudden we are interacting with another human being in a completely different way. And I think it would lead us to having stronger teams, stronger employees, if we were willing to just acknowledge that sometimes people get in a mood and they don't know why. And it probably pertains to some sort of unresolved grief.
Why do you believe we struggle so much with grief in this culture, especially in professional spaces?
Hmm. Well, I think it's kind of revolutionary to be even considering the idea of talking about grief in professional spaces. Like, who's talking about the fact that you didn't get the promotion and you're devastated, which is a form of grief, but you can't talk about it because you just got to keep putting your best foot forward just in case you want that promotion later on, right? Or something doesn't work out. Like, who's talking about grief at work? I don't think very many people are at all. And I think it's a good way to start, like teaching people how to navigate the unknown, how to become more comfortable with uncertainty, how to live in the grays instead of being in this very rigid either or black or white way of thinking, like how to navigate the grays with intention and intuition and really be willing to understand that we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And so if we were more willing to be uncomfortable in the unknown, that discomfort isn't something that I mean, I really invite people to stop running away from the discomfort and actually be in it, because that's where the magic happens. Like that's where the sweet sauce is. That's where you figure out how to listen more to your intuition and get out of your brain and go, wow, this is really uncomfortable. And also, I wonder what would happen if I made this decision instead. And that's courage. That's stepping out on a limb. And most people are really terrified to do that because probably last time they did that, they may have gotten knocked down. But we can't stop doing that. We have to be willing to stand up for the things that we are convicted about, especially now in 2025.
We all go through grief, but sometimes it feels like we're the only ones dealing with it. When the truth is, it's something we all share. It's a collective experience.
And I honestly think that I mean, this goes back to this bootstrap mentality, right? Like this whole rugged individualism, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, just get it together mentality that we have here in this country. And and this land that we are on has been grieving since colonization began. There used to be deep communal rituals here around death. And those things were completely stripped away when colonization started to happen. And the way to properly grieve is also an artifact of that colonization. To go to a funeral home, to embalm a body, to do all of those rituals around death, those are not the rituals that this land was used to. And I think that when we start to acknowledge that grief is communal, I'm so glad you said that, because it is. We are meant to be in community. It's one of my favorite things about the ritual of grief for Jewish people. Like, they sit Shiva for 7 days and people come and feed them and wail and cry and connect. And there's a huge ceremony and community around that. And that's really what I want people to connect with, is this idea that grief is actually meant to be communal. It's not an individual act. And I think if we just allowed that to be the case, it would completely change the way we operate in the world with each other when it comes to grief.
We'll be right back with more from Dr. Melissa Bird. Stay tuned for more insight and soulful wisdom coming up. We'd love for you to be a part of the Expressions of Leadership community. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts and connect with us on Instagram and YouTube at Expressions of Leadership. Welcome back. I'm Michelle Kawamoto Perry, and you're listening to Expressions of Leadership. I'm so grateful to be joined today by Dr. Melissa Bird. Now, Dr. Bird, looking back on your journey, what's a personal challenge that deeply shaped your leadership, and how did you move through it?
Well, there's two that come right into my head. The first one is when I was getting my master's degree in social work I started in 2001. I did some of the very first research on homeless youth in Utah. And it was the focus of my research paper for my research class. And based on that research that I did, I had an understanding of the law that said that you couldn't shelter a youth for longer than 8 hours without parental consent or emancipation. And in Utah, it gets very cold in the winter. And I knew that there were homeless kids, based on the research, that there were homeless kids, sleeping on the streets, whether we called them, some were runaway, but then there were also this chunk of kids, this throwaway population who had come out to their parents, or their parents had found out that they were LGBTQ and their parents kicked them out. And so we had this population of young people who were trying to survive on the streets, but they couldn't be sheltered at the Homeless Youth Resource Center for longer than 8 hours without parental consent or emancipation. And if you've kicked your kid out, you're not going to give consent for that. But I also knew we didn't have an emancipation law that could be followed by the advocates for them to help these kids go through an emancipation process to get emancipated. So I wrote one on my dining room table, taught myself how a bill becomes a law in Utah. And that was really my start in advocacy and policy making. And one of the things that happened is I went to one of the leaders in the homeless youth advocacy community, and I said, I really need your help passing this emancipation bill. We're building a coalition, and it's being introduced, and I want to make this happen. And I remember exactly where we were sitting in his office and the look on his face, and he said, "You are never going to pull this off. Parents aren't going to, the legislature is not going to vote for kids to be emancipated from their parents. We live in the family state. Utah is very family oriented, right? The culture is that we keep families together no matter what." And I was like, well, regardless of that, we still need a process in place so that kids can get emancipated so that they can qualify for services on their own. And I did it. I mean, I passed it into law 2 years later. I learned all the things. And I remember looking back at this man and saying, "I told you so." And he was like, "I literally never thought you could pull that off." And sometimes, Michelle, honestly, when people tell me, "Yeah, I'd like to see you try," I'm like, "Okay, game on." Please tell me I can't do something so I can show you that I absolutely can. The second thing that comes to mind is actually along a similar vein. When I was getting my PhD, I didn't have support from my school for my research. I was told repeatedly several times that they didn't understand what reproductive health had to do with social work, which still, when I even say it out loud, makes me roll my eyes really far into the back of my head. So while all of my colleagues were getting funding and grants from the university to do their research, I had to crowdfund to do my own research because I had zero financial support from the university to do my research. My dissertation was on how women in rural California navigate religious stigma to get contraception. And it was a very powerful research. I still love my dissertation, even though no one will ever read it. Maybe someone will read it. I don't know. It's so relevant to what's happening right now. But even the dean said, this, your research isn't relevant. And I went, oh, try me. And, my mentor didn't think I'd even get very many interviews. And like for a qualitative research study, just so people understand and have this context, sometimes a qualitative research study is like 5 interviews, right? So qualitative research is very in-depth interviewing. It's a whole thing I won't get into because it's kind of boring. But I ended up with 68 interviews. And I would leave where I was doing my research sobbing, driving home to Anaheim. It was like a 3.5-hour drive, just sobbing because of the stories that I was listening to these women tell. And my mentor was totally blown away. She's like, I didn't think you could do this. And I was like, I know. And I think that's the thing that fires me up. That's why my leadership, I used to say I was, I love that Joan of Arc quote, like, I'm not afraid, I was born to do this. It, I'm born to do this. I am born to lead. I am born to inspire. I'm born for shenanigans. I'm born for rebellion. Like, I really feel like there are these things that are happening in my life that have happened in my life as I look back on them. And a lot of it has to do with people not believing that I had the capacity to pull it off.
And what did those experiences reveal to you about yourself as a leader? In addition to obviously that you have a very strong resolve, what other values or what other maybe limitations or strengths came up for you through these experiences?
I'm quick to anger. I get really mad first. Um, when I get frustrated and I can't articulate my words and my frustration, I tend to get really mad. And one of the things that I've learned as an adult, a middle-aged woman, is that anger is actually it's a heightened trauma response, honestly. It's that response to the unknowing and not feeling like I have control. And so a couple of years ago, I actually started to very intentionally think to myself, what's a different response? And the different response was taking a big deep breath. And so this is what I teach people I work with all the time. Like, all you got to do is take a big deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And the minute you do that, you can feel your whole body line up. It's one breath, it takes less than 10 seconds. And it just lines everything up so perfectly. And then you can go into whatever situation it is that you're being brought into as a leader. And there's real power in just coming back into and connecting with our bodies in order to take the next step forward. And I think if we were willing to do that more before we tweeted, before we posted, before we talked to our kids, before we talked to our spouses, before we talked to our team, before we talked to our neighbor who's really bugging us, whoever it is, if we just took that big deep breath in through our nose and out through our mouth before we acted, our reaction would be completely different.
It's that pause and activating of that parasympathetic nervous system to get us to just relax for a moment, just so that we can be a choice about how we want to respond versus just our typical reaction.
Yeah. I had a client once who I taught her this breath and I taught her I taught her to do two big deep breaths in through her nose, out through her mouth, and then one big deep breath in through her mouth, out through her mouth, because that gets us into our heart. When we breathe through our mouth, we're actually breathing into our heart. And she would go to these board meetings or go to work or go into these big, huge meetings at her court. I mean, she had a very corporate job. And she would go into these meetings. No one knows you're doing it. It's like nobody can tell. You're just breathing. It's not like you're going, right? Although sometimes you want to. It's the smallest of breaths. It's less than 15 seconds. And she said it changed her whole trajectory at work. Everything just calmed down. And I think there's so much power in us just remembering that we have the power of our breath.
And oftentimes people will react to our reaction.
Yes.
So if we can be calm, if we can take that moment, they will mirror that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to hear more from Dr. Melissa Bird in just a moment. She's about to share even deeper reflections on intuition and grace and connection. So don't go anywhere. By partnering with Expressions of Leadership, you'll reach an audience of professionals passionate about leadership and growth. For sponsorship opportunities, please contact us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com. Thanks for tuning back in to Expressions of Leadership. I'm Michelle Kawamoto Perry, and with me today is the powerful and inspiring Dr. Melissa Bird. You emphasize the importance of listening to your intuition in leadership. How can someone begin cultivating that connection with their inner voice?
Well, the clearest, most intuitive thought happens in the first 5 seconds. So we think to ourselves, should I send that email? And immediately you'll get a yes or a no response. And then almost as immediately, the brain kicks in and is like, well, do you really want to send that email? Shouldn't we get the advice of 30 other people? I don't know. How are they going to respond? What's going to happen? Are you opening a can of worms? Are you closing yourself off from an opportunity? I mean, like we can really start going down that hole. And in the meantime, our intuition is very simple. It's like, yeah, totally, or no, don't, right? Like it's very emphatic. It's very clear. It's not muddy. Our intuition isn't complicated. It's our brains and our ego that are complicated. Our brains really muck our thinking. We're so smart. Our thinking just totally mucks up our process. And so the way I initially like to teach people how to listen to their intuition is for them to ask simple questions that aren't weighty, like we don't feel the weight of the world on them. So, do you want to wear the red pants or the blue pants? The blue pants. Great. So you wear the blue pants. And you got to follow through with whatever that initial answer is. Because, of course, I could stand in my closet and be like, do I really want to wear those shorts or should I wear my jeans? Like, I could go on in my closet all day, right? Like, I love your knowing smile. So, like, again, that's our brain saying, are you sure that you want to do this? And so just and the follow through with that initial response is what's critical. Do you want coffee or tea? I want tea. Great, you drink the tea. And then you're creating a pattern within your subconscious that says we listen to the first answer every time. And I actually, when I was teaching, I teach a program called Rebel School. And I was teaching Rebel School this week. And one of the people who's in the program, someone said, I don't know how to stop the train wreck once it starts. The thing, she called it the train wreck. Once the train has left the station, I don't know how to stop the train. And one of the other people in the group said, I really take it to heart what Melissa says about that very first initial response. And she said it's usually just a word. And so I will write down the word right away and then my brain will start going. I thought, that is really a genius tool to like if the question is this really deep and profound question, should I apply for that job at the hospital? Yes. Then you write down, yes, apply for the job. And then you let your brain go do what your brain is going to do. But the initial response is there. And then you follow, you remember that's the response. The response is yes, you should apply for that job at the hospital. And also you might want to be worried about how your resume looks, and you got to make it look good, and AI this and blah, 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 that. And, you end up going down the rabbit hole again. But the initial response is the most intuitive response. And to put it into practice requires practice. This is what I hope people who are listening to this understand. We are in the middle of practicing life. Life is just a practice. It's like yoga practice or basketball practice or meditation practice. I don't meditate. I'm very bad at it. It's life is a practice. And if we allow ourselves to practice using our intuition, listening to that initial first response, things start to flow a lot easier than they did when we were fighting with our intuition so much.
And you also speak about the graceful revolution as this path of change. Can you share what that means and how that applies to how you lead?
Oh, I love the Graceful Revolution. So the idea of the art of the Graceful Revolution came actually when I was talking to a friend of mine who I had done some coaching work with, and she implements art as a process to transformation. And we were talking about this idea that I had started to play with, that revolution is not always about pumping our fists and protest and being angry and fighting about something. Sometimes revolution happens in the most graceful moments when we give ourselves grace and when we give other people grace. And what I mean by that is absolutely protesting is important. Fighting for what we know and believe is right is important. It's very, very important. It is fundamental to our democracy, honestly. But some of us can't protest anymore. Listen, I was the queen of the protest in my 20s. But I'm 51. I've had 2 knee replacements. I can't march for a long time. I'm getting older, right? And I want folks, no matter their ability, to be able to engage in that. And also, there are acts of graceful revolution that take place in our lives every single day. And sometimes it is as simple as noticing the song of the bird. That is revolutionary because we are so wrapped up in the phone and the headphones and the things and the stuff and the overstimulation that if we notice a bird chirping, that is a revolution. Noticing how the sun feels when it hits your shoulders, that is a revolution. Noticing that it's raining when it really wasn't supposed to be 5 minutes ago, that is revolutionary. That's grace. Um, not, going off on a colleague at work, even though you feel like it's thoroughly justified, and instead just taking that deep breath and wondering why it is that they are treating you the way it is without having to do anything about it. That's grace. That is revolutionary. So if we start to notice things, the other part of the graceful revolution that I think is so important is we're such an action-oriented society, right? Like we think because action leads to clarity, leads to confidence. It's like an old coaching rule, right? That you take action, you get clear, you become more confident to do things again. If we listen to our intuition and we engage in intuitive, intentional action, like if our action comes from a space of inspiration and intuition and we're inspired to do it, then our clarity and our confidence is also intuitive and intentional and inspired. And that is grace. When we get off the should train and start really listening to that intuitive action, then the things that we do in the world connect us to the people that can lift us up in our best and highest good. And that is revolutionary because it creates the collective. And there is nothing we need more right now than the collective.
Speaking of need, you talk about asking, what do you need instead of how can I help?
Mm.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So when I was teaching social work students, I used to teach social justice advocacy in schools of social work. And my students would come to me and they'd be like, I don't know how to advocate for my clients. Like, I'm working under this grant And this grant says we have to do these things. And I'm afraid if I don't do those things, that I'm going to lose my internship, that my boss is going to be mad at me, that we won't be getting what we need, that we'll lose the grant. They go into this, what could happen if I don't follow the rules of the grant? And this is, I mean, we could do a whole nother podcast about disrupting the grant making system and philanthropy in the United States. But what I would say to them is, if your clients don't need what the grant thinks they do, because that is often the case, if the case is that the people that you're serving don't need what you are giving them, ask them what they need instead, and start taking notes. Start keeping track of what people are telling you that they need, because then you can get funding for what the people you are serving actually need. And my favorite story about that is that we had this homeless guy who used to sit outside the post office in my town, and his name was Ray. And just so everybody knows, I do follow through with my instructions. So I know his name was Ray. And Ray and I used to sit together and talk. And he had this wound on his head, like this big open sore. I think he had cancer. I remember him telling me he had cancer. And I was like, Ray, buddy, what do you need today? And he goes, I need hot lasagna. And in my head, let me be very honest, I was thinking he needs a ride to the hospital. He needs a house. He needs medical care. He needs, to go to urgent care. He needs to go to the resource center down the street so he can get treated for this big thing on his head. Like, I had 100,000 things on my list, Michelle, and not one of them was hot lasagna. And so I said to Ray, stay right here. Don't move. Stay right here. Don't move. I'm going to go get you some hot lasagna. So I go down the street to get him hot lasagna. Of course, Ray moves. And I'm driving around town in like this bullseye from the post office looking for Ray, because I knew he couldn't have gone far. And I finally found him, and I rolled down my window. I was like, Ray! And he turns around, he looks at me and goes, Missy? And I go, yeah. And he goes, I said, I got your hot lasagna. And he just started weeping. And he was like, no one ever listens to me when I tell them what I need. And I was like, well, I listen to you, buddy. Here's your, here you go. And it struck me as so profound in that moment that I could have thought of a million different social working interventions, leadership interventions, whatever we want to call it, where I could have done something completely different if I wouldn't have asked him what he needed. And if we as leaders, as influencers, as CEOs to managers at the Taco Bell, asked our employees, what do you need? It would change everything at work.
That story is a perfect reflection of a powerful through line in your work about connection, that asking what you need and listening, really listening, is what creates and solidifies that connection.
Yeah, so big.
We'll continue this beautiful conversation with Dr. Melissa Bird in just a bit. Up next, how storytelling, letting go, and grounding practices shape her leadership. True transformation starts from within. The Forward Project partners with organizations to create meaningful culture shifts and develop leaders who inspire real change. If your team is ready to move forward with purpose, visit www.theforwardproject.co. This is Expressions of Leadership, and I'm your host, Michelle Kawamoto Perry. We're honored to be joined today by Dr. Melissa Bird. You're a proponent of community storytelling. Why do you think that this is so important, and what role does it play in the way that you lead?
So I've been a reader. My dad taught me how to read when I was 2. So I've always had a book in my hand. All of the pictures of me from my childhood, I'm carrying a book. Like, I did not leave the house without a book. There is always a book in my purse, no matter where I am going. I used to escape into stories, and I used to write stories and tell stories. My sister when we were growing up, was an exceptional storyteller. She was so good at it, and we would tell each other stories all the time. I love I love that we all have a story. And some of us think it's not very interesting, but honestly, I think that all of our stories are interesting, even the mundane stories. And the power of storytelling is that what we find in hearing people tell stories, whether they are fairy tales or myths or legends or nonfiction or memoir or biography, is that we find bits of ourselves in the story. We find places of the weaving of connection in stories. And so the if we were more willing to tell our stories, not because we're trying to get something out of it, not because we want to hammer home that my story matters and it's super important and you have to listen to me, but if we started telling our stories as a method of weaving that collective, I think it would completely change the way we connect with each other, because we find those little nuggets when we allow people to express themselves through story.
What's a belief you've had to let go of in order to become the leader you are today?
That I'm not worthy. Look how easily that just fell out of my mouth. I used to believe that I was not worthy of success, that I was not worthy of money, that I was not worthy of love, that I was not worthy of connection, that I was not worthy of being this being that I knew I was, this big, loud. I mean, Michelle, when I walk into a room, everybody knows I'm there. Like, I am a very big personality. And the messages I received growing up were, make yourself smaller. You're too big. You're too loud. I mean, I cannot tell you the number of people growing up that were like, you need to be more quiet. Even my friends were like, you are so loud. And I'm like, I don't know any other way to be but to be this, like, this is who I am. I cannot. Silencing myself was really difficult. Being worthy of this voice that projects and gives these messages out into the world was one of it. Actually, it's making me emotional. Hmm, that's interesting. Believing that I was not worthy of who I am was huge.
And what do you do to remind yourself that you are worthy?
I check in with my friends. I I go I my friends, I have two friends in particular that I have been friends with since I for our whole lives, like 48 years we've been friends. And I'll check in with them and be like, "Am I off my rocker or should I try this?" And they're like, "Go for it." Okay, that's Missy's next big thing. She's gonna go for it. I also try and see myself through my kids' eyes. So, I went through a really difficult time about 8 years ago. There's nothing like getting a PhD to make you feel like you are the stupidest person that has ever walked the face of the earth. And I was finishing my PhD in 2017, and I was really struggling. Like, I thought, I have, who am I? Um, and I thought to myself, how does Sean see you? Sean's my baby. And at the time he was 5. No, he was 7. And so I thought to myself, how does Sean look at you? And I was exalted in that moment. I was like, oh, he thinks I'm funny and nurturing and caring, and that I know how to make homemade syrup, and that I'm kind, and that sometimes I'm a little too much, but that's okay. Like, oh, that's how Sean sees me. And I actually also did this thing for once a year on my birthday. I would ask my friends to describe me in 5 words. I'd like send a mass text to all my friends. And the things I got back, Michelle, were just extraordinary. I was like, wow. I had no idea this is how other people saw me. I had hoped that was how other people experienced me, but I didn't know that was how people experienced me. And there's something very affirming in asking your friends and your family to describe you.
And what's a practice or ritual that keeps you grounded?
Well, I think the first one is that big deep breath in through the nose, out through the mouth. There's just so I can feel everything just come in and anchor me to the ground. But my other favorite one, honestly, I really am one of those people that will walk outside and put my hand on a tree. I'm always looking for the tree to just go, "Hey, you're doing a good job growing." I tell trees that all the time, like, "Thank you for being here. Please don't die. I'm sorry about what's happening in the world." Um, there's something really profound about touching a tree, uh, that really just I can feel it. I can feel myself go, "Phew," and just connect to the earth that way. I love walking barefoot in the grass. I really do love walking barefoot in the grass, and I love just sitting. I have an egg chair, one of those big egg chairs that rocks. I have a big rocking egg chair, and I curl up in my egg chair and just rock back and forth and just look at my yard. It's just very grounding, very comforting.
One final pause, and then we'll close out with Dr. Bird's reflections on legacy, love, and the seeds we plant for the future. Stay with us. Love what you're hearing? Hit that follow button wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. And be sure to connect with us on Instagram and YouTube at Expressions of Leadership. We're back on Expressions of Leadership. I'm your host, Michelle Kawamoto Perry, and with us today is special guest Dr. Melissa Bird. As you reflect on the impact that you hope to have in your work, your family, and also in your community, what do you most want to be remembered for?
My authenticity, my how funny I am. I'm so funny. And that I have really big ideas, and that some of them work out great, some of them take longer than I want, some of them don't happen at all. But I do it anyway. I was just sitting here thinking about that, remembering that I almost dropped out of high school. Like, I was not destined for greatness as a 17-year-old. Um, and here I am with a PhD. And I go back to my class reunion, and everyone's like, "What do you mean you're a doctor?" Like, nothing more brutal than growing up in a really small high school where everybody knows who you are. Um, when I want it, I go for it. And I want my kids and my friends and my godchildren and people the world over to remember that every time someone told me there's no way you can pull that off, somehow I do.
Before we move into the advice and fun question segment of the show, can you share the best way for our listeners to learn more about you and also to get in touch?
Yes, the best way to learn about me is to go to my website at drmelissabird.com. That's DrMelissabird.com. And there you can find links to my Substack and my podcast, and also the programs that I offer, the retreats and the classes, and all of the public speaking that I do. And that is, you can become part of my newsletter and connect with me there.
So now for the advice question. If you could leave one message etched in the hearts of those that you lead or inspire, what would it be?
Well, I'm going to actually take it from my girl, Eleanor Roosevelt, who is one of my most favorite first ladies. And it is something around be afraid and do it anyway. Like, there is something so profound about acknowledging that this makes us really, really nervous and doing it anyway.
And now for the fun question. What's the most unexpected hobby or skill that you have that people might not know about?
I am a cross stitcher. So you can take the girl out of Utah, but you cannot take the Utah out of the girl. And I am an avid cross stitcher. So I love doing counted cross stitch, and I love it. Um, I may be the queen of the unfinished project, but to be fair, I have literally been cross stitching the Last Supper for like 3 years. My goal is to get it done very soon. I won't guarantee it, but I love count a cross stitch. I could sit and watch shows and count a cross stitch all day long.
Dr. Melissa Bird, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your story, and your heart with us today. Your ability to weave together soul, justice, grief, and joy offers such a powerful model of what leadership can be when it's rooted in truth and compassion. Thank you for the work that you do, the lives that you touch, and the legacy you're building with so much grace.
Oh, thank you so much, Michelle. It was such an honor to be here with you. And I just really love talking to you. It makes me so happy.
And to our audience, thank you for tuning in. We're so glad you joined us for this conversation on expressions of leadership. Until next time, keep leading with intention, with compassion, and in your own unique way. If you haven't done so already, make sure to click on that follow button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Have a guest you'd like us to interview? Questions, ideas, or just want to say hello? You can reach us at letstalk@expressionsofleadership.com or connect with us on Instagram or YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, thanks to our amazing team behind the scenes for making this podcast possible, including our sound engineer, Graham Palmer, and my chief encourager and advisor, Jeremiah Higgins.